of all the Americans who got directly involved in the war in Ukraine, and there are quite a few of them actually. The one with by far the wildest story is Daniel Martindale. Martindale was not the first American to risk his life in order to support or help the Russian cause, but he's the only one who's done it behind enemy lines, completely on his own, and eventually he had to be rescued by Russian special forces. I met him in Mariupol some 16 months ago, when he was for a brief moment practically the main story on all the news channels. The conversation you're about to see was recorded the following day in Donetsk by a film crew that was making a documentary about the war. They used pieces of the interview for their movie, but other than that, this is the first time the entire interview is published. Of course, in this day and age, we can't even trust our own eyes. So it's only natural to ask the question, can we trust Daniel Martindale? Is his story genuine, or is this some propaganda operation? And Martindale himself is aware of this doubt. He told me that he understands why even Russians, even the guys tasked with protecting him 24/7, are still cautious and somewhat suspicious toward him. But I do trust him. First, those parts of his story that can be verified, do check out. Even the Western media, traditionally unfriendly toward anything pro-Russian, corroborated everything Martindale said about his time in Ukraine. And second, this is a very long interview in which he talked a lot about his entire life. We went into details as much as possible. I questioned him as thoroughly as I could. You'll be able to see his reactions, his facial expressions, his body posture and movements while he's talking. I don't think a person can be under the spotlight more than Martindale was at that point. And my firm impression is that, yes, he is telling it how it happened. Of course, you're more than welcome to come to your own conclusions and share them under the video. In fact, comments will be greatly appreciated, as will be likes to this particular video and subscriptions to the channel. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Can you please introduce yourself, your full name and where do you come from?
Yeah, Daniel Martindale. Well, I guess it would be alright to include my middle name, Daniel Richard Martindale. Where am I from? I'm from the world.
But where
I was born in New York State in the United States.
When?
In 1981. You want
91.
the date? 1991.
91, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Do you want the date?
Probably for horoscope, you know.
Only if you're going to send me a birthday card.
Okay, I promise.
February 25th. Okay. My parents live in Indiana, though, right now, and that's where I spent about half of my childhood, half of my adult years. So I'm kind of half New Yorker, half Hoosier.
And you actually lived in Indiana in big city or not?
Always in the countryside.
Countryside?
Yeah. The closest we got as a family ever to living in a big city was in New York State, where we lived in a little town of Adams.
How big was it?
Oh, I think there were probably about 3,000 inhabitants.
That was the biggest city you lived in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you grew up in a farm, right?
Yeah, we grew up living on different farms where my dad was working.
How was it? I mean, can you describe to us, like, how was your life like on a farm in Indiana?
Well, that kind of lifestyle started out in New York State, but Indiana, I suppose the differences weren't really all that huge. Biggest difference is that in Indiana, there isn't as much of a dairy culture, whereas in New York, you always had the field crops right alongside the cows that you were feeding with those field crops. And so you always had dairy, milk, all that was going on. I would say it was perfect, really. Not that I have a whole lot to compare with. If I had lived maybe half of my childhood in a big city, I might have a different opinion, but I would say it was perfect.
I mean, you were much more in touch with the nature, let's say, than people from your kids your age that live in big cities. You know, did you see the difference in school or something? You know, like where you maybe different from them, from the rest of the kids, or not,
Yeah, we did get to see what kind of differences there are between ourselves and other children when we go to church or soccer practice. And if we compared ourselves with city kids, I think we always felt privileged to have spent a lot of time in the countryside, because we were always healthier, stronger, better developed. And we spent our times building forts in the woods and stopping up the creek to stopping the water flow, swinging from tree to tree and having accidents. But we learned to be tough, and I guess it probably helped me even in my most recent experiences in Ukraine.
But you said that you played soccer, right?
Yes.
It's not actually called soccer. I mean, it's football.
Yeah, for
everyone in the world, but you.
For about 85% of the world, 90% of the world, yeah, football.
Very good at it. What position did you play?
I was best at goalie. We didn't really have very good coaching, because the point of our soccer practice was really just to get the kids to exercise. So there wasn't a whole lot of good theory and coaching in how to actually manage the field. Sorry to my old coach, if you're watching this. I don't mean to say anything bad about you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, a big family. Parents, Christians from before their marriage. There were 5 of us growing up. I had older sister, younger sister, older brother, younger brother. I had...
you were right in the middle, right?
Right in the middle. I think I probably had my best relations with my younger sister. We were only a year apart, year and a half apart. And if you looked at us from this perspective of somebody who didn't know our family, you'd probably think that we were twins. We were really close, never fought. Always had really good conversations with each other, really close. With my brothers, typical. Always bumping heads, fighting.
Did you win most of the fights or not?
I lost all of them.
And can you tell us a little bit about your ancestry?
My European ancestors all came to the United States long before it was the United States, when it was still a English and French and Spanish colony. Who had what? They were from Lower England, or England proper, and from Scotland. I do have one Native American ancestor, my great-great-grandmother on my dad's side, Grace Martindale. So I have, technically speaking, 6% of my blood is American Indian. But I still have their big hands and big feet.
Well, that probably helped you as a goalie in soccer, right?
Yes.
And let's now move to 2005. You were 14 then, and you recently said that was when you realized that America, the country you were born in, you lived in, was your enemy. Yeah. What led to that specific conclusion? Do you remember? What was the moment of that realization?
It's very easy to remember, because it was associated with a film that was circulating on the internet in those days called Loose Change. There was a 3 high school students from New York State, actually from, I think, the same area. Yeah, I think one of them was actually born in the same town where my dad grew up. But they started out shooting a film about the September 11th terror attacks, and their idea was to shoot a film that was fantasy. And they wanted to, their idea was to have this fantasy plot where they showed how that the 9/11 attacks were actually an inside job, that American Secret Services, FBI, CIA were actually in cahoots with some people to actually make money on the tragedies.
It was meant to be a feature film, right?
It was meant to be fantasy, fiction. And when they started doing the research, they found out that it was real. And so instead of a fiction film, it became a documentary. And over the course of the next 5 years or so, I think, probably just about everybody in America at least heard about it, if not watched it themselves. And we were about in the middle of that process, of that 5-year period, where the American people really were waking up to the fact that their government was not who they wished and hoped that they were.
Do you remember what was the most shocking revelation for you?
From that film?
Or in general in that time, in that period?
Probably just coming to grips with the fact that a lot of people had died in the planes. Although it's not exactly clear if those planes actually did fly, what happened to the people that were actually in the airport who went and flew somewhere. A lot of unanswered questions. Probably the unanswered questions were the most haunting thing about what happened to the people that were supposedly killed in 9/11 but just disappeared.
When do you think America became like that? The way it is now, the way that you recognize as your enemy. Do you think that it was inevitable from the start, let's say, or there was a point in time where America could have gone the other way, take some other path?
Well, if we talk about America's history before 9/11, I would say that our best chance to turn back and go back to the America that was more honest and transparent was with John F. Kennedy and with his brother Robert. They both were trying to set up a alternative money system in the United States based on silver backing that would have given the American people the choice to leave the fiat currency, which we had been forced into using because of the Great Depression. Really, I think that's the key, is the money. If you take away the elites, the Federal Reserve's ability to tax through inflation, not only the American people, but the entire world, whoever has a dollar, then you really take away their power. They themselves, I think it was J.P. Morgan who said that he who holds the gold writes the rules, or no, I think he's the one who said that if you give me control over a nation's money supply, I don't care who writes its laws. Whether it's the people or a king, it doesn't matter, as long as I have the money supply under my control. And so really getting out of that fiat monetary system, which really came from England, I think it was our only hope. But that died with the Kennedys.
Do you think that they died because of that? Or?
I'm almost sure of it. I probably can talk about this now. My mom, when she was in her teens, she was friends with the son of a CIA agent from Watertown, New York. And I can't remember all the details, but apparently she later realized that one of the business trips that this CIA agent took to, I believe it was Texas, that he was actually one of the CIA agents who killed Robert Kennedy. So it's a small world.
And speaking of your parents, how did they react to your realization in 2005? I guess you talked with them about that, with your siblings, with your friends. I mean, how did your environment react to your change of heart, let's say?
I'd say it was a bit of an echo chamber, unfortunately, at first, because we all watched the film together. We all decided that it was the truth together. There wasn't any really second opinion to say, no, you guys are missing something. I guess we could have turned on the news to see what the other opinions were, but I think for a long time the news just ignored that film. If we brought it up with some of our other American citizens, we didn't do that immediately, but I think about half and half we found agreement that yes, we understand also that George Bush and his sons are all involved in this.
Did you ever get in trouble, maybe, because of expressing your opinion to somebody who didn't like it?
Well, the worst thing that happened was that some people decided they didn't want to be our friends. As far as trouble with the authorities, I think they already realized that it was out of their control. There was nothing they could do. I think all that they tried to do was just to demonize the three teenagers, basically college students, who shot the film, tried to discredit them, but they were a bit late because there was already a whole association of architects and engineers who came behind them and said, yeah, we are looking at the evidence and we also see that it's impossible that the 9/11 reports report that their version of the events is truthful.
When you say that America is your enemy, do you consider the entirety of America, or you make a difference between different layers, different groups?
Yeah, I definitely have to. As in any country, there is, I think probably in most countries, the large part of the population knows the truth, but really can't do anything about it. But the people who have the power, the guns, the money, the people who can put you in jail or decide to oppress you with tax laws or try to smear you in the press, that relatively small part of the population, the powerful part, that is my enemy. Because I see that they are willing to use deadly force to get their way. They didn't start doing that at 9/11, but it was definitely a big leap into using that force against their own citizens. And they've continued to do it by sending young men and women to die for false pretenses against Iraq, Syria. They want us to fight Iran now.
Serbia, 25 years ago, yeah.
After the fact, but Libya, Afghanistan, all of the young men and women who, on a wave of patriotism, went to fight for their country in those Middle Eastern countries, if they died or were injured, or if they killed someone over in those countries, that's all blood that's on the hands of that elite that sent them there based on a pack of lies.
Do you know anyone who actually went there to fight and then came to pretty much the same or similar realization as you?
Personally, I don't know anybody like that. I do have one relative I know who went there to fight. If I think long enough, I probably can remember some other acquaintances who went to fight there, but I do have one brother-in-law who was there. And he justified his actions there, saying that, well, we ended up in that situation. They were shooting at us. We had to try to survive. And so I fought, he says, those are his words, that I fought for the guy next to me to survive. And so if that was his only motivation that he can tell me, I realize that he probably also realizes that patriotism had nothing to do with the war there.
Do you have other enemies outside America? Countries or whatever, ideologies?
An enemy for me is someone who wants to do me bodily or fatal harm without me being guilty of that kind of punishment. I think I probably have quite a few enemies right now in Ukraine. I might have some in England right now, in Germany, in France, people who are really dogmatically convinced that Ukraine is an innocent country who was attacked for no good reason. Of course, they're completely wrong about that, but they might have a desire to do me harm because of my spying for Russia. But they're just deceived, just like the American troops were who went to fight in Afghanistan. So I suppose I probably have many more enemies than I know about.
We'll get to that point where we talk about Ukraine, but just a little bit more. I want to talk about America. Is there anything uniquely American or something in America that you actually like or love or even respect?
At the risk of enticing someone to actually go and live there, which I don't want to do, I do have to say that I have an abiding respect for the American court system. I know of a lot of instances where justice was served, and the person who was being persecuted by a large corporation or by the government itself actually was able to win and get justice. I don't know of another country where that kind of thing actually happens. I'm sure it does happen, for example, in Britain and Germany and France. But I do know of a lot of instances from my own country where the court system actually does work. I do like the fact that for a lot of different type of business activities in the United States, you don't have to do a lot of paperwork. You have a relatively free hand to develop and to do business, even just as a single person. But I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't suggest anyone else to go there, just because you're falling into the trap of being so busy with work and your own prosperity that you forget about the fact that you really are part of a system that is oppressing the rest of the world through the dollar.
So even if you weren't under the risk of being arrested, you still wouldn't go back to America, right?
I wouldn't want to, no.
When was the first time you actually left America to live somewhere else?
The first time I left with my family or by myself?
By yourself, yeah.
By myself.
It was solely your decision, yeah.
Yeah. That was in 2017. When basically, you could say I went back to China to work.
You were in China before with family, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In what capacity did your family went to China?
We went 3 times. First time was to be involved in a missionary project. Our cover was being farmers. The last 2 times that we went to develop the market for a machine that we have that works soil. Farmers will hook it behind a tractor and work the ground with it. We wanted to build and sell that kind of a machine in China. That was our official purpose. In reality, I think we were really trying to just get out of the United States before World War III would start. But that was our official purpose.
So in 2017 you went back on your own, right?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
I think I probably got a clearer picture of China. I realized that it's not a country for me. That I really would be that it would be a really serious uphill battle for me to try to live there and work there.
So after China?
Russia.
When did you come to Russia for the first time?
For the first time
And where?
The first time was in 2015 in September, early September. We had a need to move from our border town in China somewhere so that we could get new stamps in our Chinese visa. So the closest border was with Russia, and so we just crossed the border with Russia, and a few hours later came back. That was between the cities of Hunchun, China, and Slavyanka in Primorsky Krai, Russia.
And later on, when was your actual proper first time introducing Russia? When you introduced yourself to Russia for the first time, properly, like when you spent some time there, some quality time in Russia?
That would have been a little bit later, that same year. just that small trip from Hudson to Slavyanka allowed us to see that there were a lot of empty fields that used to be part of collective farms that now were just laying empty. And so that kind of got us thinking, maybe we should start a farm in Russia. And so through some friends that we had met in China, who were from the Khabarovsk region and from Vladivostok, also Christians, we organized a trip to go look at farmland near Ussurisk in Primorsky region, and an old farm near Troitskaya in Khabarovsk region. So that gave me a pretty good eyeful of Russian countryside, city, and everything really seemed to fit my idea of an ideal place to live.
So that is why after China you went to Russia, right? When you were on your own, when you...
Probably. There's a key element here that I understood that Russia could be not just an okay place to live, but also that they would be an ally if there was ever to be a World War III type event with the United States. At that time, we were beginning to see that Russia was willing to flex their military muscles and put a stop to the West's invasions and incursions into the Middle East. We saw that they were willing to actually threaten the United States with their new nuclear weapons and say, for example, in Syria, no, we want Bashar al-Assad, the real democratic leader of this country, to maintain governance. And they were willing to put their lives and equipment and money on the line to save a guy who was really worth saving. And so I saw that, okay, yeah, in Russia I see a lot of healthy kids and happy families, at least that's what it seemed like to me, and a decent place to live with lots of opportunities to grow and develop something. And also a government that thinks the same way I do about what the West is doing since their provocation of 9/11 in 2001. So.
When you mentioned the nice kids and families, if I can tell you my impression, and please tell me if you share it, but it always amazes me how many happy couples there are on Russian streets compared to the cities in the West. Is that your impression? I mean, just pure number of couples, it's amazing.
I would say that it's just part of Russian culture that people walk the streets a lot. In the States, if a couple is together, they're in their car. You don't see them. In Russia, you see them because they're walking. It's just the way transport works, probably. But the reason for it being what it may, I was probably impacted by that as well. That culture of relationship was very visible.
If I'm correct, it's been more than 10 years between your realization that America is your enemy and your realization that in Russia you actually might have an effective ally.
Yeah.
Right? How was that during those 10 years? I mean, did you, finally, when you realized that you have an ally, did you actually realize that you missed the ally all that time?
I don't think that I had a moment where I regretted not having gone to Russia sooner. I was so busy working with my dad since I was 16 years old, helping him, I guess, make his dream come true, that this machine would be sold and used in America and around the world, that I didn't really pay much attention to politics. But I did follow things enough to realize that, yeah, America is going the wrong way. And
if you would have to choose, who or what are the main victims of something that we can call American hegemony?
The main victims?
I mean, there can be more than one answer, of course, but what would you list as?
If we're talking about American hegemony that's happened during my lifetime or for all time?
Well, let's do both.
Do both? For all time, I would say Soviet Union. If America had pursued different policies, I don't want to offend anybody in Russia, but a lot of the economic difficulties that the Russians had to deal with in the 20th century and in the 21st century, America could have done a lot to help. They could have done a lot less to harm and to hinder, but history is what it is.
And in your lifetime?
In my lifetime, it's the Middle East. How many millions of innocent people have died since 1991? In Iraq, Libya, Northern Africa, Afghanistan. All because of America's interventions there.
Does America, in your opinion, have enemies that are able, that can be a legitimate threat to its very existence?
I think it's probably obvious that Russia is capable of presenting that kind of a threat. Not that I think they would use it first. I think that they are always trying to position themselves so that they are responding to something that gives them no choice, so that they're not at fault. In terms of economic pressure that could be put on the United States, I would like to think that China has some amount of power to do that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Can we now focus on this particular conflict in Ukraine?
Okay.
Do you remember when did you for the first time heard about it? Mm-hmm. And when did you realize that there's going to be a war? And when did you personally decided to get involved in it in the way you eventually did?
Okay. I think that probably, like I say, no, I didn't say this, but we didn't have ever a television at home, so all of our news was from over the internet.
Never ever?
No.
You grew up totally without television?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to make a documentary about you. That subject, after we do that. But okay. Yeah.
We had a television set with a VHS player, so we could watch old movies, but actual television news programming and entertainment, zero. Okay, but you wanted to talk about Ukraine.
Yeah.
So I didn't have my news from the TV.
Please fill in all the interesting details like that one. I don't mind at all.
The first thing I probably read about the Ukraine conflict was something from the internet, something like Washington Times, something like that, probably. And the focus of the article was on how it's so dangerous for the civilian population. They were talking about how some boy went to go play and got blown up by a bomb that was laying there that he touched, and he was killed. There wasn't any information in the article about whose bomb it was, who was at fault. And then further on in the article there was a story about how some town had been part of separatist DPR Republic, and how the Ukrainians came back in and they were chewing out the local government for having kept working, for having become part of the Donetsk People's Republic for some time for not having resisted. But they didn't really give you any kind of an idea about who was in the right, who was in the wrong in that situation. They just tried to give you a picture of how difficult it is to make your way when the political and military situation is so fluid, so unstable. I came away from reading that article with a desire to somehow understand how to resolve the conflict and perhaps help them somehow, but with no real clear idea about how to do it. From there, I probably saw some news about the different Minsk agreements that took place. One thing that sticks quite firmly in my mind is how it was reported that the representatives from the Donetsk People's Republics, when they were at the talks, practically refused to negotiate with the Ukrainian side because those Ukrainians are terrorists. And apparently, maybe, no. Yeah, so I came away with the idea that these people here who had separated off from the Ukraine were very against Ukraine to the point of calling them terrorists. And it seemed to me that if they were going to call them terrorists, then there had to be quite a few deaths or casualties among the civilian population for them to use that kind of a term, and for the Western press to repeat that word, terrorist. So that made me begin to think that perhaps this separatist region has some real solid complaints against the Ukraine.
Did you start investigating on your own?
No, I kept working 14 hours a day.
But so when was it when you actually got familiar with the nature and the essence of this conflict?
I don't think I got a real clear idea about who was in the right, who was in the wrong. And it wasn't even completely true what I understood, but at least I got the right idea from reading the website, what was it called? Southwind.org. They basically mirrored different news articles from Russian media, and it was all in English. So it was actually my parents, my older brother, I think maybe, who found it and then sent it to me. I was in Ukraine that time. The war had already started.
Do you remember when was that?
Yeah, that would have been about the first or second week of March 2022. They sent that to me. And I began to see some more detailed reports about Ukrainian aggression against the civilian population in Donetsk and Lugansk.
You probably followed the Ukrainian news up to that point. What they were reporting about.
No.
No, you didn't. Huh?
No.
You were where? In what Ukrainian city you were?
Yakhatin.
Where is that? Sorry,
That's in
Ukrainian too.
That's in Kiev region. I was actually trying to get from Kiev to Donetsk, and so Yakhatin was kind of along the way. I stopped there because my bicycle broke down.
But you went with the bicycle.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Why did you specifically want to go to Donetsk? You actually wanted to go to the Donetsk controlled by DPR, right?
Yeah.
You knew that it's a DPR, and you wanted to go exactly there, right?
Yeah. I came to that conclusion that I needed to get to Donetsk when I was researching where I should go to try to get to Russia from Poland in the winter of 2021-2022.
How did you come to Poland? How did you come to Poland? That's also interesting, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of like a last-ditch effort to find a relatively inexpensive place to study veterinary medicine. I had tried in Russia and then in Belarus and in Ukraine, but deportation from Russia barred that opportunity.
Okay, let's talk first about the deportation. How did that came to be? How did that come to be? Yeah.
Yeah, I was basically getting trained. I was preparing to enter university studies by studying Russian in a university in Vladivostok.
That was when, sorry?
In 2018 and 19.
That was probably immediately after China, right? When you
Yes.
left China, yeah.
And when I first left China, I knew that I wanted to get involved with farming. And so I went to visit friends in Nahodka, and through them they introduced me to a pig farm that was close to Nahodka in a little village called Novaya Sila. And there I got acquainted with the chief veterinarian on the farm, and he told me that as a veterinary doctor, he was able to earn enough money that after about 5 to 10 years of working on this big farm, he was going to go and buy himself a little plot of land and a house, and he was going to have his own little farm. He was going to start his own little business. And so that got me thinking, I could also train as a veterinary doctor, work as a vet, and then start my own farm. If this guy has decided that it can work for him, why can't it work for me too? And so I started looking at how I would get to the point of being able to be hired on a large dairy farm or otherwise on a farm in Primorsky region. So that led me to the Far Eastern Federal University in Vladivostok, where I started learning Russian. And just out of my own financial needs, I needed to work. Fortunately, in Russia, they do allow students to work, but the fine print is that you can only work in the educational institute, the university in my case, where you are studying yourself. I worked for there, but when they didn't give me hardly any work, I also went and started working in other private schools in the city of Vladivostok. And apparently, that was against the rules. Only in the university. In those private schools, I was breaking the law. And so they found me when I was right in the middle of a class. Yeah, said, "Come with us." And about a couple weeks later, back to China.
And from there you went to what country?
Thailand. For a couple months, I think I was in Thailand. Also working as an English teacher. And then back to the United States just for that summer of 2019. And then on to Belarus, where they said, "You're barred from Russia. And that means that you can't come to our country either." So back to the Ukraine.
And where did you end up in Ukraine?
They actually wanted to send me all the way back to New York City. But I said, "No, leave me in Kiev. Give me back my passport. Give me back my luggage." And so he's going to be stubborn. "Okay, fine. You can stay in Kiev."
Do you think that they would oblige you if you weren't an American citizen?
They told me that it was just the rules of their airline, that if your country of destination refused you entry, they were obliged to send you all the way back to your point of original departure, which for me was New York. But I did not want to go back to the United States. I already knew perfectly clear that I don't have any future there in the United States. So, all right, at least leave me in Ukraine. And
So what did you do in Kiev?
For the first couple of weeks, I didn't know what to do. But eventually I got the idea that, maybe somewhere in the Ukraine there is a university that still teaches in Russian, and I can study veterinary medicine there. I found a university like that in Kharkiv, but when I got there and talked with some of the other foreign students that were there from African countries, basically, from Morocco, they told me that they didn't actually study anything there, and that the classes were actually not in Russian, but in Surzhyk, a mix of Russian and Ukrainian. And so the Russian that they were taught really didn't help them a whole lot understand the teacher, and so they just gave up and just paid for all of their exams and for their diploma.
When they were openly talking about it to you,
Yeah.
even though they just met you.
Yeah.
So it was like an open secret, right?
Everybody knew it. I went and talked to the dean of students about this. I wanted to complain that I can't really study if I don't have any classmates who are going to provide that kind of atmosphere. What am I going to do? Just go and be the only student in class? Just the teacher and me? 2 people in a classroom where there should be 50 people? How is that even possible? And so I understood that.
What did he answer?
He told me that, you're in Ukraine. You chose the wrong country. And so I said, okay. I didn't.
So if I got you correctly,
and I left for Poland.
Everyone else was actually paying for their grades, right?
Yeah, all of the foreign students, 100% of the foreign students.
Literally nobody went to classes or studied.
No, they just sat in the dormitory and watched TV.
And was it like? Did you get the impression that it's specifically for Kharkov or for that university, or do you think that it was nationwide in Ukraine at that point?
After I realized that was the situation there, I did try to investigate some other schools in Kharkiv and in Poltava and in Kiev, and it didn't take long for me to realize that the situation was the same everywhere. And so I gave up and went to Poland.
And how was it in Poland?
Well, I only got so far as to learn Polish to a level where I could have entered university, but COVID happened. 2020. And so all of the exams to enter university and all of the things I needed to do, all the paperwork I needed to get done to actually start studies, it was impossible basically to do anything because of lockdowns, quarantine. So I gave up again. But I still didn't want to go back to the United States, and so I was very happy to get an invitation to go work as an English teacher at a summer camp in 2020, where they were very happy to have me because all of the flights were canceled and their American English camp was without teachers, and so they needed somebody like me.
That was in Poland, right?
Yeah.
So there they actually study. You actually had students, not...
Yeah. I got the impression from talking to high school students, university students there in Krakow, that it would be very rare, if not maybe impossible, to buy your grades. And so I was looking forward to studying in Poland, but didn't work out.
So when did you come back to Ukraine?
Yeah. I actually crossed the border on February 11th, 2022.
Some 13 days before the Russian special operation, right?
Yeah.
What was your reason for going back to Ukraine? Was that actually a reason? Did you realize that something was going to happen or not?
I think it was probably pretty clear to everybody that a war was about to happen. Just because of all of the war rhetoric that was in the Western press. They were accusing the Russians of preparing to invade Ukraine for about 2 months before the war started. And so I realized that if you connect that dot with the other dot, which was the fact that they needed a big distraction to get people to forget about all of their dirty deeds related to COVID and the vaccines, like the Pfizer and all of the injuries and deaths that were related to those vaccines, that you get a war in the Ukraine. 2 + 2 = 4. And so before the war, I was telling everybody in Poland in my church that we're about to have a war. And it was just my supposition at the point, but I was 90% sure that we're about to have a war. And given the fact that it's the Western press versus the Russian press, who are doing the media preparation for this war, I realized that this is really not just Ukraine and Russia. Definitely not just Ukraine and the Donetsk People's Republic. This is West versus East. East versus West. This is Russia versus the United States, basically. And I knew that, given the fact that the United States is definitely not acting out of pure motives, and the fact that Russia had previously had experience saving a little country from the clutches of the American monster, that history was probably going to repeat itself, and that this very well might turn into World War III. And if it's going to be World War III, I want to be with my friends, not with my enemies.
And how did you end up in Boyaring?
Ooh. I crossed the border into Ukraine by bicycle. Once again.
I think that you may be the first human in history to go to the war with bicycle, but okay.
No, there were other ones. There was actually a cyclist, a professional cyclist, who he hid his activities of couriering messages in and out of Germany by bicycling from Germany down to Italy. He actually crossed the front lines multiple times with written messages hidden in his bicycle during World War II. I'm not sure if he was German or Italian, but there is a historical precedent for this.
So you went by bicycle
and I got stuck in Lvov. Ukrainians everywhere are very hospitable, and so they welcomed me in and gave me a place to stay, and I couldn't tell them that I wanted to go to Donetsk, of course. I realized that everybody basically in Lvov was very in support, very patriotic for Kiev, for Ukrainian government, that they were very against Russia. They were careful to make sure I knew about Russian oppression during the Soviet Union, about how they suffered so much from Russian oppression during Golodomor, the 1931-32 big famine that was in Ukraine. That's another story completely, but it helped me. It made me realize that these people, even though that they are my brothers and sisters in Christ, in faith, that politically we don't see eye to eye. So I had to try to keep that secret. I don't think I did a very good job, but I couldn't tell them.
I think that this did sense your true affiliation. And how did they react to that?
Neutrally, I suppose. I think that when I hinted at what I wanted to do, I think that's what triggered them to try to convince me that Russia was such a bad character. I tried to talk to them about Syria, what happened there, about the good things about Russia that I had seen in Vladivostok, but they weren't convinced, and I knew that convincing them really had no purpose. So I'm thankful to them that gave me a place to stay, a very nice warm place to stay, and very good food, typical for Ukraine. But they also, thanks to them, I got a ride in the first day of the war from their place in Lvov to Kiev. From there, I got away from them again. I escaped from my very hospitable hosts, going east through Kiev to basically through the countryside to Yakhatin. The police did stop me on the second day of the war, the 25th, my birthday. And they did question me and examine all my documents. And they had a lot of questions about why I had a credit card or a debit card from Sberbank, Russia, about why I knew Russian so well, about why I had spent so much time in Vladivostok. But thanks to God, they decided that I was not a Russian spy, because they could see that I still had groceries from Poland, that I had not come from Belarus or Russia, I had come from Poland. So they let me go, and on my merry way I went.
That was the deciding factor, that you came from Poland, right?
Yeah.
Like no Russian spy would ever come from Poland, right?
Yeah, if I had come from Belarus, or if I'd been in Ukraine for a long time, I think probably the outcome may have been somewhat tragic. But I continued on by bicycle from Yakhatin through Kramatorsk and Kurachovo, and eventually I decided on Bogoyavlenka as the place where I would stay and wait.
You already spoke Russian at that point. You know what Bogoyavlenka actually means, right?
Yes.
Did that play any role in you deciding to stay there?
Probably about half of the decision was the name of the village.
And did the village live up to the name?
No.
Why?
Not in any way.
Why do you say that?
I didn't see much of any manifestation of godly character from anybody in the village. There were some very nice people in the village. Most everybody, I think, was for Russia, but real self-sacrifice, altruism, neighborly helping one another, I didn't see very much of that at all.
But they were openly for Russia, right? They were talking between themselves and with you about that, right?
Yeah.
They were expressing pro-Russian sentiments.
Yeah, they did.
It was, just to put it in the time frame, it was late February or early March, probably, right? When you got there.
I arrived there on April 13th.
April, oh yeah, it took a while. Yeah,
It took a while to get there.
So by that point, the special operation was already going on, and they were still, pro-Russian, right? When you reached Bogoyavlenka.
Oh yes.
How did they express their pro-Russian sentiments?
I didn't get to really interact much with the locals until spring of 2023. It took a long time for me to actually start making contacts with the locals.
And what did you do in the meantime?
For the first few months, I basically just sat at home. My hope was that everybody would just forget that I lived there.
How did you find home? Did you just enter some empty house, or did you actually pay the rent?
The people who had left the village because of fear for their safety were very happy to have me come and live in their place, just because that was going to be a guarantee that military would not live there and that I would protect it against looters. So I didn't have to pay anything. If anything, they would have been willing to pay me. So it wasn't any trouble finding a place to live.
How did you manage to eat, or to live? What was your daily routine back then, before you started communicating with the villagers more?
Basically just fixing myself breakfast, then I would look at the news, and then I would spend most of my time either trying to learn something, a new skill, something on the internet, language or Morse code, or maybe fixing something, doing something with my hands. There were times when, even there in the very beginning, there was something that I could fix around the property. But basically it was pretty boring existence.
It was a big property, or?
Very small, really. There was the house and the garage and another house, and basically there was a little space in between the buildings where nobody basically could see you, even from above. Yeah, they couldn't see you, so it's pretty private. I just spent my time basically doing I read the Bible a lot, prayed a lot, basically just kept to myself.
At that point, how far were the front lines?
For the first 2 years while I was there. The front line was always about 11 to 12 kilometers away.
So you could actually hear the fighting going on, at least artillery, right?
The fighting that was happening on the front line, if it was something really heavy duty, like aerial bombardment, I would hear that, but I wouldn't hear anything else. I would see the smoke, but I basically didn't understand what that looked like.
And after the first few months, when you started interacting with the villagers more, how did that come to be?
At first, everybody had a lot of questions. The most common question was, how did you decide on our village? They were very skeptical and careful at the beginning, but...
Well, you probably understood why.
Yeah. They understood that if I was to tell Ukrainian authorities that they were pro-Russian, that there could be some pretty negative consequences for them. Maybe they had already been through questioning of some type, so maybe they weren't all that afraid of it. Perhaps experiences had already hardened them to that, but it did take a while for everybody to open up.
And in those days, did you see any military going through village or maybe stay in village?
When I arrived in the village, soldiers were walking and their vehicles were parked everywhere. My impression was that basically the only people in the village were soldiers. That was my impression immediately. After being there for a while, I understood that, I have a neighbor, I have another neighbor, but they didn't show themselves a whole lot. They weren't very visible.
That was at the beginning, and later on?
Later on, a lot of them moved out, decided that it wasn't worth the risk to wait. So they would move anywhere from 60 to 100 to hundreds of kilometers away. Some of them, if their house or their property was extremely seriously damaged, and they had relatives in Russia, some of them went to Russia.
There's the villagers, and what about the military?
The military, they were everywhere. They lived all around me, in private homes, in public buildings, school, in the church, I think, and not in the church itself, but under the church. In
the basement. Huh?
In the basement. Yeah.
Was it the Russian Orthodox Church or
Russian Orthodox?
Russian.
Yeah.
Well, did they force themselves in, or were they allowed to be in the basement? Do you know, maybe?
That depended on the brigade. Some brigades just came in and just broke open whatever door they wanted to open. Others would try to find somebody, a local, who had the keys to the house. It's about half and half.
I mean, it's obvious now that the Ukrainian government is cracking down on Russian Orthodox Church. It was obvious even back then. So what was the relations, especially you being a missionary and a man of faith, what was your experience with that, and how did you react to that?
Well, all I had to do was tell the military that I was with the Pentecostal church, and that's a fact. That's true. And they left me alone. But in about the second or third month of the war, all of the I don't want to call them personnel, but the priests and the people who ran the church there in the village, they all left for fear that there would be reprisal against them.
Where did they go? Do you know?
One went to Moldavia. Another, I think, made it into the Donetsk People's Republic, into Russia.
So, can you tell us how did your interaction with the villagers develop, and from then on, like when you got accustomed, let's say, to the neighborhood, to the village, How did your everyday life change? And
The first people I actually got in touch with were my landlords, of course, by telephone. And then they came to visit. They would come and bring me food. So that was nice. But they got me in touch with some of their relatives in the village. And their relatives were actually kind of leadership in the village. So that was a good starting point to begin to getting acquainted with everybody.
how big is actually the village? How many people live there?
Before the war, there were about 1,200 people in the village. During the Soviet Union, there were about 3,000 people there. It's about, I think, 4 or 5 long streets wide, and maybe about 25 or 30 alleys long. So it's kind of a long, not so wide village with 2 farms and even a small airport.
Good.
So, yeah.
And how did you came to the idea to actually help the Russian army?
Well,
Sorry, but just asking for at that point when you got accustomed to the village, did you know that you are actually in Donbass? That
yes.
the DPR authorities consider that their territory that they are trying to liberate it.
Yes, I understood that from what I was reading in Telegram.
Mm.
I think I understood that even from before I came to the village. I think I understood that when I got to Kurakhova.
Mm.
But
So how did you come up with the idea?
For me, taking part in any kind of an activity where people are dying, people are killing, there has to be a justification for that. And for me, I understood that the Russian army, their main purpose, my understanding, was that their purpose was to stop the Ukrainian artillery from killing civilians on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. In Donetsk, Gorlovka, Lugansk. And so for me, I understood that there was blood on the hands of the Ukrainian army first, and that what Russia was doing was in response. And so in my mind, that's like when you have a mass murderer who's shooting into a crowd of people and a policeman is trying to stop him. Well, if I was in a situation where I see that kind of something happening, if I have a gun, I'll try to shoot him myself, this guy who's trying to murder innocent people. If I don't, I'll try to help the policeman. And so for me, the policeman was Russia. So I'm in this situation. I see that it's happening. I can hear the artillery firing. I know that they're killing people who don't deserve to die. So if I have any ability to help the policeman, Russia, I will.
So you actually,
how could I do otherwise?
So you actually arrived at Boyarninka with that mindset, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And how did that came to a realization? When did you decide that now it's okay to act? After everybody forgot about you, as you say, what was the point when you decided, okay, now I can act?
As soon as I figured out how to get on the internet there in the village, I started acting. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing and what I was seeing. I didn't understand what information was needed by the Russian side, but even from the very beginning, I was sending some kind of information, whatever I thought was important.
What kind of information was that?
I can't say. But my contact in Donetsk told me, stop, don't. It's not safe.
He was worried about you, right?
Yeah, he didn't want me to do it.
So did they trust you immediately, or did you have to earn their trust?
I don't know. I really don't know. That's a good question for them. I think probably they started to trust me when they realized that I had made such a trip by bicycle.
We always come back to the bicycle.
Yeah. But that probably was not the end of their doubts. I think they probably completely stopped doubting me probably after I had stayed in the village for more than a year. I think that would be logical. That it's possible that even today they still have some doubts. That would be wise of that kind of a secret service, always to leave some room for doubt. But I did see the effect of some of the information that I passed to them.
Can you reveal that effect?
I can only say that it was a big relief. That I was very happy to see that. That I was actually doing something and that there was some effect. But there was a really long time when I would pass information and I would see no effect. More than a year, when I don't think there was any evidence for me that I was actually having any positive effect.
People usually, 99.9% actually, fear for their lives when they're in the war or in the war zone or near the war zone. And on top of that, you actually put yourself in harm's way even by helping Russians,
Yeah.
Did you feel any fear, either from the war itself or that you're going to be exposed or arrested or whatnot, that you're going to be taken into custody by Ukrainians, or that somebody from the village will figure out what you're doing and maybe rat you out?
Well, just so you understand my relationship with fear a little bit better. When I was a child, before a certain date, I was afraid of a lot of things. There were times where, about at 10 years of age, maybe 10 or 11, where it would be difficult for me to go to sleep because I feared that the house might catch on fire. I had those kind of fears. Or I would be having almost nervous attacks when we were riding in the car because I thought we would get into an accident. So I had a lot of fear. But at 13 years of age, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I stopped fearing death. After that, I realized it was something that changed in an instant. I understood that fear of death for me was no longer needed for anything. I understood that if I do die, that I'm just going to see Jesus. And so I have nothing to fear. I'm ready. And so when there were situations in the village where I could have been seconds away from dying. Multiple times when I could have had just 1, 2, 3, and I could have been dead.
Can you recall any of those questions or any of those situations now?
I can, but what I felt in that moment was a responsibility. Responsibility to my parents, to my friends, to people who are waiting for me in Donetsk to survive. Because I knew that if I die now, a lot of people are going to be disappointed. My mom wants to see grandchildren from me. And so I didn't want that to happen because I knew that it would be a lot of pain and emotional suffering for a lot of people. For me, okay, no problem. But I'm going to do my best to make sure that I survive. But without a whole lot of fear. I don't think I actually felt any fear. It's just that feeling of, okay, let's work hard now to make sure we survive.
Can you reveal any details about your activities? I mean, something that's, of course, not that you can reveal, but people who are watching this interview are probably dying to hear any detail whatsoever.
I'll share one thing. there was yeah, I can't share that. There was a place in the village where the Ukrainian military would repair their vehicles a lot. And they had been repairing their vehicles there for months and months and months, 2 years. And they had been hit before by artillery, but this time they were hit by a bomb that was dropped by an airplane. So complete destruction. And the shop basically had caught on fire, and I could hear that there was a dog in the ruins, and that if I didn't get the dog out, that she was going to die in the fire. And so I start trying to find this dog, throwing the bricks and the chunks of concrete and the boards off. It's on fire, but I'm still trying to get to this dog. And then as I'm working there, one of the drones, kamikaze drones, comes and flies in and goes right past me and explodes pretty close. And so I understand that I'm a target.
But it was a Russian drone, right?
I'm not sure whose drone it was.
Ukrainian, yeah.
But apparently someone doesn't like the fact that I'm working here. But maybe it was a mistake. And then I'm working, and a second drone in the other direction and explodes about 5 meters away. And I just happened to be holding a big piece of wood right there, and so I didn't get hit. But I decided, if they've already tried twice to kill me, they're probably going to try a third time. So let's go. But it was just all pure logic. And I still had a cool head. I didn't run away because I was worried that, they're going to get me. I just walked away.
I have to ask, what happened to the dog?
I don't know. She's probably died.
You, growing up in a farm, and your experience, did you have any farm-like environment in Bogoyavlenka? Did you have
Yes.
like pets or what?
From the very beginning, I had
Dog or a cat?
I had a cat that my landlords left behind. They should have taken her with them. Eventually they did come and they got her about a year later, but from the very beginning I had cats, then dogs.
Cats and dogs.
Yeah, and then goats, and chickens, ducks, and in the very end, just before the very end, I even had 3 cows.
Really?
Yeah.
Like Noah's Ark.
Yep.
In a way. Yeah. I mean, what were you doing with them? Did you work with dairy or whatever, with milk?
The goats, I did milk the goats, and I'm sorry if there are any animal lovers here, but I did kill a few of the goats to eat. That's the reality of living in a war zone. You have to survive somehow. The goats, that's about all I can say about the goats. The ducks, of course, they were for meat as well. So, sorry. I killed ducks as well. The chickens were for meat and for eggs. So, a little bit more humane, but still. The cows, I was just trying to rescue them and to give them a safe place where they wouldn't get killed by the different explosions and debris fragments that would kill them, shrapnel and whatnot. I don't think I succeeded, but I didn't much milk them. I just milked the goats.
I have to ask you one more thing. I guess it's not an easy question, but I've seen a lot of people in the West, even Americans, YouTubers or commentators or whatnot, that did change their opinion or their view on this conflict, on this war, in these 2.5 years. Did you have any kind of, adjusting or maybe even doubts about are you doing the right thing or anything like that, I mean, it's probably one thing to just imagine that, and it's probably something else when you're actually on the ground in the middle of the war zone, and you are surrounded by people who, I guess in your eyes you're trying to help, but some of them actually may be against what you're doing if they knew what you were doing, so soldiers probably would be against Ukrainian soldiers, and you probably interacted with them. So did that affect you in any way?
I don't really think that I saw much of a change in the political beliefs of anybody in the village. If they were waiting for Russia, if they believed that Russia was doing the right thing, I think that stayed their opinion. There were people who they lost their home because of the war. That's just the reality of the war, that Russia had to use their artillery, and they don't always hit their target. And so those people lost their home, but where did they go? To Russia. So they didn't consider Russia their enemy, even though they suffered because of Russia's war effort. They understood that Russia is the good policeman, and that even if he shoots and misses and hits my leg, he still wasn't trying to hit me. He was trying to take care of this criminal.
And what about you? Did you have any?
I had to adjust some because the amount of damage that I saw that was done to civilian property, the amount of people that suffered, civilians who suffered because of the war. It seemed to me at first that unnecessarily a large amount of suffering was happening among the civilian population, but if you put together the whole puzzle, you realize that everything really was done as professionally as it probably could have been, and that there really is no reason to complain. But at first it was a bit of a shock to see that the civilians were being put through such a hard time.
Sorry, I just have to. I'm going through Ivan's questions. It's not a problem if I pause a little, right? Just to, because I don't want you to lose the thread. When I saw your conference in Moscow, I guess, the first thing practically you said about yourself, I'm the guy who Russian special forces risked their lives to get out of harm's way. Yeah. How did that happen? How did you feel about that? I mean, you're obviously proud, let's say, or because of that, that's something that you actually put forward, and how did that make you feel? That realization that they actually risked their lives to get you out of the village, and how did actually that come to happen? How did they come to pick you from, to save you from the village?
Everybody who was part of the liberating the village was risking their lives. I don't know if the guys who came and rescued me were risking their lives more or less than the other guys. It's possible that they actually were given an easier assignment, and that rescuing me was actually safer than actually going and fighting the Ukrainians that were in a different part of the village. One way or the other, they did risk their lives to come and get me. I probably...
Were you aware of that at that point? Did you know that they are coming to save you?
Yes, I did.
How did it make you feel?
The fact that they were with me didn't really make me any safer. But I needed them to be able to get out of the village, because going by myself, it's possible that the Russians might think that I'm Ukrainian and shoot me. So I needed them to get out, but overall, we really were surviving together. So,
when you look back at the entire experience, can you share with us any moments or situations that you would consider the most dangerous for you?
yeah, probably the most dangerous thing that happened was when a kamikaze drone came very close to hitting me. It was not the two that I talked about before,
the other
but
incident, huh?
another one. I was next to a burning vehicle. It was really loud because of the fire that was in the vehicle. The horn actually was working, and so you couldn't hear anything. You couldn't hear that the drone was coming. And so I saw the drone when it was only about 10 meters away. So it was very difficult to run this way, then that way, then the other way, and then hide in some bushes. And apparently his camera was of a bad enough quality that he couldn't see me. But the chances that I would escape from that situation unharmed were very low.
And let me phrase this question this way. Even though America is not officially involved in this conflict, probably many Americans, many your countrymen or former countrymen, would actually be angry at you for doing all that. What would you say to them? If you had the opportunity to hear their complaints, you can probably picture what they would say, the way they would criticize you, and what would you reply to them?
I would say two things. First is that until you actually experience the war for yourself, either from the Russian side or from the Ukrainian side, I experienced it from the Ukrainian side. So anything that they think that I was doing to harm the Ukrainian side, I saw perfectly what was going on. And for me, there is a 100% moral justification for everything that I saw Russia do in the village. So take it from a person who has been on the ground, who has seen the whole picture, and not just for a day or two, like your reporters who go to the front line, but a person who actually lived there for 2.5 years, who saw the village go from being basically in a peaceful pre-wartime situation all the way until seeing the Russian troops arrive. I saw the whole process, and I cannot complain about what Russia is doing. So take it from me. Second point is that if you're complaining about me having caused extra or unnecessary damage to Ukrainian civilians, understand that I understood the moral reasons why I had to do what I was doing, and that I was taking just as big of a risk as all of the other villagers who were also taking a big risk. It's not like I was sitting somewhere 5, 10, 15 kilometers away and saying, Russia, go hit a target over there. No, I was sitting right where the bombs were falling. So I have every right to say that Russia was in the right.
And of course there are many Americans that actually agree with you in regards to the US foreign policy, US hegemony, but they never did anything similar to what you did. What would be your advice to them?
Learn Russian. Without that, basically, I don't think there's a whole lot of opportunity for you to help. Learn Russian.
Can you explain that? Can you elaborate a little? It's a beautiful answer. I like it, but please elaborate a little. I can sense why did you say that, but please elaborate for people who never been to Donbass or Russia or Ukraine for that matter.
Mm. You need to understand what all of the little nuances of what people are talking about who are reporting from the Russian side. There are foreign reporters who come to the Donbass and who report from the Russian side, but there's a whole lot of information that will help you understand what is really needed, how you can help, that's only available in the Russian language. And if you really want to be part of the Russian effort by doing something similar to what I've done, or just going and being part of Russia, you need to learn Russian. You need to know the language. So start that way. If you want to do something in your own country, good luck. It's possible that if I had stayed in the United States, I could have done something to help, but it'd be best, I think, to just be out of that system so that you're not using dollars, so that the US government isn't using your labor, your life to pay for their crimes. Really, that's the key to the whole thing, is money, and that system, that dollar system, coming to an end. If one of you listening is like Robert Kennedy or John F. Kennedy, and you think you can do something like Ron Paul wanted to do in 2012, give it a try. But keep your helmet and your bulletproof vest on.
Would you have any message to those in Russia who are, let's say, indifferent to this war? Or maybe to what you did, they would not consider that important or whatever.
I would say to them they should look at the crimes that Kiev government is responsible for, and go to church, pray, see what the Lord would have you to do to support Russia's effort to stop these crimes.
And what would you say to those Ukrainians who, just like the people that you met in the Bogoyalin do support Russia, are pro-Russians, but they are, maybe too afraid to speak openly about it. Mm-hmm. They are secretly waiting for Russia to come, but they can't do anything, or they are afraid to do anything about it. What would you say to them?
I would say that if you do have any intelligence that you can pass to the Russian side, do so, but be very careful about how you do it. Figure out how to make sure that no one can find that information in your phone. If you're not 100% certain that if someone checks your phone, that they can't find evidence to show that you have been spying for Russia, then don't do it. It's probably not worth it. There are probably other people near you who are capable of doing it safely. You can try to find out who they are, perhaps, and help them, but don't take an unnecessary risk like that. There are a lot of you. Don't worry. So
you know that for a fact, right?
Either do it safely or let someone else do it.
When you said there are a lot of you, do you know it for a fact, or
I
it's
don't.
just your guess?
I don't know it for a fact, but I believe that Ukrainians at heart are capable of that kind of heroism.
What would be your possible advice, or what would you say to Ukrainian soldiers?
I really should say something more to the Ukrainians who are waiting. Just that if you think that Russia is capable of hitting only their target every time, don't be deceived. War is very ugly, one way or the other. And if you see that the front line is about 20 or 30 kilometers away and that it's moving in your direction, you probably should have already moved out of the way when it was 40 kilometers away. So do your best to stay safe. If you do decide to stay where you are and wait, make sure that you have lots of water. That's the first thing. Lots of clean water. Make sure you have a way to clean the air that you're going to breathe. Not because of chemicals or nuclear war, but just because when the war gets really close, there will be a lot of fires. And even in your cellar, there might be a lot of smoke, and you need a way to breathe. It's very important to have your water and your air. Food, it can take second place. It's good if you have enough food for at least a month at all times. But water and air, make sure you have those two things.
What would you maybe say to Ukrainian soldiers? I mean, we hear reports all the time that they have a big problem with morale in Ukrainian army throughout Ukraine to recruit new soldiers and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you have any knowledge about that? Did you see that while you were in Bogoyavlenka? And in general, what would be your message maybe to Ukrainian soldiers?
I would say to them that they should realize that their commanders and their government are responsible for a lot of murders. And the fact that they are in that army, in any capacity, makes them an accomplice to those murders. And so, if you're there, you should be there to stop them, to hinder them, to help the Russian intelligence fight against the Ukrainian army. Or, if you're not capable of doing that kind of a spy's role, filling that role, you should refuse to fight. Just refuse. Don't be afraid. They'll send you to jail. They might do something else with you. But you'll be safer than if you let them take you to the front line. Even if you think you're going to surrender there in the front line, that is more dangerous than what will happen to you if you just refuse to fight.
Do you have any general knowledge about the casualties on the Ukrainian side? I mean, there is a lot of talks that the casualty rate is insanely high, but we have no, personal. We don't have contact with them, of course. At least we journalists from this side. So,
I did see more than once how that there was a big influx of new troops into my village, and when they left, there were a lot fewer of them. A lot of them had died or had already been wounded and left earlier because of that. So I would agree that the casualty rate is quite high. I saw quite a few soldiers, actually, when they first came to the village, who were already wounded. They should have been sitting in a hospital somewhere, but instead they sent them to the front line again.
Overall, when you look at the entire journey of yours for the past 2.5, almost 3 years,
Yeah.
do you think it would have been possible if you weren't an American citizen? I mean, how much weight does American passport carry in nowadays Ukraine?
If I had a Russian passport, I would have immediately lost my head. If I had some other European passport, perhaps.
French or German or Spanish, right?
It may have actually been easier.
Really?
Yeah. I think even the Ukrainians understand that even though the American government is very heavily in favor of Ukraine, that the American citizens, to some degree, are not quite so sure about what their government is doing. So, did they fear harming me because I'm an American? Perhaps. I don't think it was a deciding factor, but it probably helped now and again. on the other hand, you have to realize that if you're at the front line, or if you're in an active war zone anywhere, it doesn't matter what passport you have. If they want to kill you, they can kill you and just say that it was the Russians who did it. It's very easy to cover those tracks. So fear that the American government is going to say bad doggy is probably not very pressing.
Do you plan to apply for the Russian citizenship now? I mean, what in general, what are your plans for the future? How do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or in 10 years?
Well, it's as we discussed ever since 2018 or so, 2017. That's been my desire, is to have a Russian passport and to settle down and have a farm and family. I still hope that will all happen, but the war does change things a bit. And as long as there is that criminal element that is trying to destroy that crowd of people, and there's a policeman over here who needs help, I should help him.
So you don't plan to settle down and live peacefully ever after?
I don't think I could do that right now, right away, just because a war is on, and there's a good reason to be involved.
Mm.
I'm not sure if my involvement will be of a military nature or helping civilians who are caught in that situation, but one way or the other, I think that's where my calling is.
You already made one public conversation with your family, but I mean, I have to ask: are you in any way, afraid that the government in America or somebody might try to harm them?
I do see that as a possibility. The possibility of that gets ever the more serious as I continue giving interviews and appearing in public. But that's what I need to do right now. So I can only pray that the Lord will protect them and encourage them to come to Russia.
So if your mother finally meets her grandchildren through you, where will that be?
Magadan.
Daniel, thanks for this interview.
You're welcome.